Hi everybody. I bought these Prolite Garda DS 2.0 wheels recently, and the rims and everything's fine, but the bearings were shot. So I got the wheels home, and it turns out that the bearings weren't worn in the way I would have expected them to be worn. They weren't just loose in the centre, which then resulted in play when you shook the wheel at the rim. They were notchy and unworn. The rim was still tight with no play at all. So I thought there was something unusual in the way that these bearings had worn, and I think I've got to the bottom of it. I've made a little drawing up, and I'll show that drawing now. I'll have a little chat about that, and then we'll go and reinstall the new bearings and hope to avoid the same problem. So here's a pretty simple sketch of a cross section of the hub, and you may be able to, it's pretty ropey, but you may be able to see you've got the body of the hub, you've got the two bearing cups, one on either side, the spindle runs through the centre, and the skewer runs through the middle of the spindle. And there's the spindle there, and the spindle has a little collar either end. Now, when you drive the bearings into these cups, they'll sit up against this little collar at either end, and it'll have to be pretty carefully machined, because if it's not, the spindle will rattle about between the bearings, or on the other hand, the bearings will push hard up against these collars and again put a side load on the bearings, on the inner sleeve of the bearing, pushing it sideways and wearing against the side of the cup. And I think that's what's happened here. The chance of it being machined so carefully that the width between the bearing cups is exactly the width between the collars is slim. So I think the collars will be slightly wider. So you drive in one bearing, and then when you drive in the other bearing, you're pushing the bearings hard against these collars and creating a side load. And that side load creates wear, and the old bearings wear notchy and a bit strange. So let's try and assemble this hub so that it's done properly. We don't get a side load, and we get smooth, long-lasting bearings. The bearing type and size are shown here. I've got that wrong, it's DS 2.0, not 2.0 DS. There's the size, the internal diameter, the external diameter and width on both, and the code for each. And what I'm going to do now is find a socket that's close to 24 to do the front ones, and close to 26 so I can drive in the rear ones. This is very faint, but that's my 17mm socket, and you can see it's 23.84. It's just under 24mm to drive in the front. And I've got, let me see what size this is. Not showing up, but that says 19. So the 19mm socket suits the bigger rear bearings, and the 17 fits the smaller front bearings. So here you can see I've driven in the first bearing, and I've driven it all the way home against the back of the seat. I greased up the spindle. I put a little bit of grease on the bearing housing actually before I put the bearing in. Now the spindle's in. I move slowly down. Big hammer. I drilled a 10mm hole in this piece of wood. I'll put the spindle in there, and then I'll drive the second bearing in. But I'm going to do it slowly by degrees, and whenever I feel that I've got rid of all the lateral play in and out of the spindle, I'm going to stop. I'm not going to try and drive the bearing all the way up against its seat. When I feel there's no play in that, I'm going to stop, because I think if I keep going, I'll get the side load that I'm keen to avoid. I'm ready to tap this bearing in now, and now you can see the bearing seat on the hub. And you can also see the colour on the spindle. And it's impossible to see if they line up correctly or not. So I'll keep tapping away till I get rid of the play that I mentioned earlier. Let's see what we get. Bearing is almost all the way in now. And if I push that with my thumb on the left hand side, you'll see there's still movement. There's still lateral movement in that, so it looks like it needs to go in a bit more, and it clearly does. So I'll keep tapping very gradually and checking for movement and stopping when I get none. Here's a lesson learned. I've tapped that in a bit too far, and when I turn the spindle now with my fingers, I can feel that that's got resistance and is a bit rough. So what I'm going to do now is tap the spindle on this side gently a few times here and there, checking as I go, and try and just get rid of that roughness, because that, I think, is what's happened in the first instance and caused the wear that we had. That doesn't feel right at all. And here we are. I just tapped the spindle. I had to do it a few times, checking and tapping and checking and tapping, but that feels silky now, and when I push it side to side, there's no lateral movement. So I think we've achieved what we've tried to do, a smoothly moving spindle with no play. But you have to be careful when you're tapping the ends of the spindle from either side, just to create a little free play in the bearing, because that's an aluminium front spindle, so it's not as strong as the rear, which is steel. So I think we've achieved the result on the front, and now we'll go to the back. What I should have mentioned was I still had the collars to fit on either side in the front, and I've done that now, and you may be able to see, yeah, there's a little 2mm hex grub screw that sits either side and holds those collars in place. So that's the front wheel ready to get a tyre and tube on now. Here's me making a start on the rear. We'll have the freehub body, the larger bearing, the 26 by, I can't remember. I showed you earlier, and there's a steel goes in on top of that as well. I've cleaned all in there to make sure it seats nicely. So this one can just get banged in all the way deep to the bottom. I'll do that now. So that's that bearing all the way in now, driven in with the 19mm socket. I'll put some grease in there, pack it out with grease, and then put that seal on. And then I'll use this 12mm Allen key and this screw to put the freehub body back in place. You can see here that the freehub body's been pushed in from the other side. I put lots of grease on that as well. And then from this side, the securing nut, lots of grease, gets put in with a 12mm Allen key. I'll give it a good tighten, and then we're ready to put the bearing in on this side. Where the bearing sits deep within the housing on this side, and I've over tightened it, and the spindle's notchy and not pleasant to try and turn. So I'm going to go to this side and give that a tap with a hammer and check it, tap it and check it until I get this nice and smooth with no free play again. That's that tapped in now to a place that I'm happy with it. There's more drag on the rear hub than there is on the front hub. It's harder to get the feel that you're after, but it feels smooth, and I'm pleased enough with that. So I've got cones and things to assemble now, and I'll do that, and that should be the wheels finished. We can see here how the rear spindle isn't symmetrical. It has a longer end beyond the collar on one side than the other, and the long end, which is counterintuitive, the long end goes to the non-drive side. You would think the long end would go to pass its way through the free hub, but that's not the case. So it's long end here, short end over there, and I'll put the cones on now. I'll tighten up one side, then check for smoothness, then the other side and check for smoothness. And that way, if it goes wrong at some point, I'll know which side to blame. That's that all assembled now. The big aluminium cone and the lock nut on that side, and the smaller steel cone and lock nut on that side. There we go, that's it in focus now. And the screwer on, so we're all done. It's ready for cassette and a tyre and tube. So thanks for watching.